Hello everyone, welcome to ArtBookNook, where I share my fantastic collection of art and craft books. Today we're going to look at the 30th anniversary edition of Exploring Colour by Nita Leland. It's all about understanding and using colour with more confidence. It explores how to choose colour combinations that don't just work but will really bring a painting to life. Nita will guide you through building a palette, selecting colour schemes and show you how to control colour in your work. Inside you'll find exercises, demonstrations and examples from a range of artists, all selected to help you develop your own sense of colour, rather than relying on guesswork. Nita Leland was a respected artist and teacher, and very sadly she's passed away only recently. Her approach to colour has influenced many artists, and Nita's experience and wisdom lives on in her wonderful book. So let's take a look inside and see what it has to offer. The introduction sets the tone for the book, treating colour not as something to guess at, but something you can learn and develop over time. Nita Leland introduces the idea of building your own colour vocabulary, learning how colours behave, how they mix and how to use them with more intention. She explores this across different media with practical guidance on mixing, working with limited palettes and understanding colour schemes and contrast. Throughout the book there are exercises, demonstrations and examples from other artists, all encouraging you to experiment, observe and gradually find what works for you. It's a very open approach, less about strict rules and more about developing confidence and a personal way of working with colour. We begin with Chapter 1, Discovering the Joy of Colour. Colour is what brings a sense of life and connection to a painting, and it's something that can feel much less certain if we don't fully understand how it works. Nita highlights how many artists rely on colour without always knowing how to mix it, choose it or adapt it to different situations. She encourages a more thoughtful approach so that colour becomes something you can work with confidently rather than something you second guess. The aim of Nita's book is to help you move beyond recipes and begin making your own decisions about colour with a clearer sense of control and direction. This section introduces the basics of colour theory, starting with the idea that primary colours cannot be mixed, but they can be used to create everything else. Nita also brings in the concept of modern primaries, magenta, yellow and cyan, which offer a slightly different way of understanding how colours mix. For example, did you know that magenta contains no green and when mixed with yellow it will produce a red? There are 4 practical exercises for you to work through. The first is to take your 3 primaries of choice and create secondary and tertiary colours from them. You can mix this up and use different reds, yellows and blues and compare the effects, and even compare magenta, yellow and cyan too. Exercise 2 is all about how your own eyes react to colour, and there are a few fun exercises to try. Exercise 3 is to make a series of tertiary triangles which will help you to mix muted colours. And finally, exercise 4, Nita encourages you to create a series of colour wheels. There's a clear emphasis on observation and experimentation here, from various colour mixing charts to noticing how our own perception of colour can shift. It's very hands-on. Nita encourages you to explore colour for yourself rather than simply memorising rules. I like to do these exercises when I'm having one of those days when I'm not sure what it is I want to paint. And if you save your results in a sketchbook, you'll end up with your very own and very useful colour reference library. Nita recommends you begin exploring colour within your own chosen medium, so you build a more personal understanding of colour and discover what colours resonate with you personally. Have you ever noticed how you can instantly recognise the work of another artist just by their colour palette? 2 artists that instantly spring to my mind are Paul Talbot Greaves and Hannah Woodman. Nita suggests starting a simple colour journal where you can collect swatches, taste mixtures and note what draws your eye. Here Nita turns the focus back onto your own work asking how do you currently use colour, and if your choices are made deliberately or simply out of habit. Nita suggests you explore this more closely, using familiar subjects but approaching them in different ways, perhaps through the seasons, using a traditional and more limited palette as a starting point for understanding how a small group of colours can be used more effectively. Alongside this, the concept of a colour personality begins to emerge. We're often drawn to certain colours instinctively, aren't we? For example, I have a preference for warm colours, olive greens and soft pinks. Chapter 2. Learning the language of colour. This chapter introduces the idea that colour affects us whether we're aware of it or not, and begins to explore how it communicates both visually and emotionally. Nita explains the terms and ideas that help us describe what we're seeing more clearly, and from here the book starts to look more closely at the properties of colour and how those influence the way a painting is experienced by the viewer. Here Nita provides you with an illustrated glossary of colour terms, which is just wonderful and really helpful. In most books, these terms are simply listed with text explanations, so to see them presented visually like this makes it so much easier to understand. Nita explains key concepts such as contrast, harmony and complementary colours, along with the basic properties of colour including hue, intensity and temperature, and also touches on ideas like glazing, layering and colour schemes. Throughout, the emphasis is on understanding these ideas visually, so they become something you can recognise and use more instinctively in your own work. And Nita suggests creating your own personal glossary or journal, using visual examples just like these to help these ideas to become more familiar to you. Nita explains how lighting affects the way we see colour and how our eyes naturally adjust without us realising. This can lead to notable shifts in colour, particularly when we're working under different lighting conditions. The photos at the bottom of the left-hand page illustrate this really well. If you followed my progress as I started this channel, you may be aware of the struggles that I had in the beginning with lighting. It drove me mad. So Nita encourages you to work with consistent lighting wherever possible. From here, she introduces the core properties of colour: hue, value, intensity and temperature, building a clearer understanding of how these work together and how they influence the way colour is experienced in a painting. Here Nita explains what we mean by hue, the basic identity of a colour. Hue and colour are general terms, such as red, yellow and blue, whilst alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue are just pigment and paint names. She introduces the colour wheel, showing how colours relate to one another and how they move from primary through to secondary and tertiary hues. And she highlights how even simple subjects can become much more striking through the use of clear, confident colour in the reproduction of the painting on the right-hand page by artist Linda Daly Baker, called All in a Row. It's a real wow painting, isn't it? And painted entirely with transparent watercolour on cold-pressed watercolour paper. Who would have thought that a row of ordinary parked bicycles could look so exciting? Value is the lightness or darkness of a colour. Nita explains that every colour sits somewhere between the extremes of black and white, and that understanding this range is essential. She encourages you to compare colours in terms of their value, using a grayscale as a reference. Notice here where the colours of red, green and yellow sit along the value scale. And Nita has two exercises to help you: comparing pure colours to grayscale values and creating value scales for the colours in your own palette. Here Nita explains colour intensity, sometimes referred to as chroma, which describes how bright or muted a colour appears, from strong vivid colour through to softer, more subdued tones. And by adding black or grey or white, or by using complementary colours, Nita shows you how intensity can be adjusted, and how these subtle shifts can be used to create balance and interest within a painting. Through a series of exercises, She helps you to develop a more sensitive eye, so you can recognise and control colour intensity more easily. Here Nita explains colour temperature, the idea of warm and cool colours. She shows you how warm colours such as reds, oranges and yellows tend to come forward, while cooler colours like blues and greens tend to recede. She highlights that temperature is relative, so a colour can appear warmer or cooler depending on the colours around it. You can use this to your advantage to create movement and atmosphere within a painting. And through the use of colour wheels and simple exercises, Nita helps you to develop a clearer sense of how temperature can be used more effectively in your own work. Chapter 3. Exploring colour characteristics. Here Nita teaches you about the unique behaviour of individual colours and how different pigments can vary. She explains that with the wide range of modern materials available, it's important to become familiar with how each colour works, and she encourages you to test and explore your own paints, getting to know them before adding them to your palette. Here we take a closer look at the difference between pigment and paint. Nita explains that pigment is the pure colour itself, while paint is made by combining that pigment with the binder and sometimes other ingredients. The quality of paint can vary, particularly between student and artist grade materials, where the amount of pigment can make a noticeable difference. Nita encourages you to become familiar with the pigments your paints contain, rather than relying on brand and colour names alone. Nita explains how pigments are classified and described, and the difference between organic and inorganic pigments, and how these can vary in their characteristics and behaviour. She also highlights the importance of light fastness, helping you understand how well a colour will hold up over time and why this matters in your work. And by learning to read paint labels and understand pigment codes, Nita helps you to make more informed choices when selecting colours. Now you'll explore how colour works through hands-on practical experience. Nita encourages you to create your own colour workbook, a place to test your paints, record your observations and begin building a personal reference. She explains how important it is to experiment, comparing colours, exploring mixtures and noticing how different materials behave. Nita also looks at the differences between various mediums and how the composition of the paint can affect the way a colour performs. She recommends testing the light fastness of your colours and shows how the same colour can vary between manufacturers depending on how the pigment has been treated. Throughout, the emphasis is on learning through doing, developing your own understanding of colour over time. Here Nita makes suggestions on how you might organise and manage your paints, encouraging you to sort your colours in a way that makes sense to you, whether by hue, intensity or temperature, and to create clear labelled colour charts as a reference. She also offers simple but helpful advice on caring for your materials, from cleaning your palette to understanding how different mediums and dilutants affect your paint. By developing a consistent system, over time your colours will become easier to recognise and you'll begin to know instinctively which colours to reach for. Across this spread, Nita explains how transparent colours allow the layers beneath to show through, like stained glass, while opaque colours tend to cover what's underneath. On the right-hand page, she illustrates how this can vary across different mediums, with watercolour typically being more transparent and others, such as gouache or acrylic, providing more opacity. In this video description, I've linked to one of my own tutorials where I compare optical colour mixing using transparent washes with mixing colours directly together. I think you'll be quite surprised at the final effect. Tinting strength is the ability of a colour to influence a mixture. Nita explains that some colours are much more dominant than others, quickly overpowering a mix, while more delicate colours will have a much softer effect. She encourages you to test your colours, observing how they behave when combined and how much adjustment is needed to achieve balance. Have you noticed the incredible painting top right by artist Joan Rothell? The cut glass on the draining board really sparkles, doesn't it? It never fails to amaze me how ordinary everyday subjects can be reproduced so beautifully. The term staining quality refers to how deeply a colour sinks into the surface. Nita explains that some colours stain the paper, making them difficult to lift or remove, while others remain more on the surface and can be adjusted more easily. She encourages you to test your own colours, observing how they respond when you try to lift or soften them. Here Nita introduces you to granulating colours. This is where the pigment separates slightly as it dries, creating a natural textured effect on the surface of the paper. They are a big favourite with landscape artists and used to create texture on walls, rocks and grassland and lots more. She illustrates how some pigments, particularly the mineral pigments, settle into the paper, forming these mottled patterns, while other colours remain smooth and even. Nita encourages you to recognise which colours will granulate in your own palette to give you that added texture, so you can use them intentionally in your own work. Bottom right, Nita illustrates how you can add sparkle to your artwork. You can use touches of interference, iridescent, pearlescent and metallic colours. Nothing quite compares to the flow of watercolour paint when applied to a damp surface, when the paint begins to move, soften and bloom across the paper. It's what makes watercolour so magical. Nita illustrates how this effect is influenced by the amount of water, how wet the surface is, with the colours continuing to travel and blend as they dry. As the pigments move, they can separate and interact in unexpected ways, creating soft edges, subtle transitions and sometimes those distinctive blooms or halos. Blooms are sometimes called cauliflowers, and artists either love them or hate them. A fabulous artist called Shirley Trevenor embraced them and would use them very deliberately in her work, as seen here in her painting Still Life Against a Pinboard. By experimenting with different colours and levels of moisture, you'll begin to understand how to guide them rather than fight against them. Nita now shares a range of simple techniques to introduce texture into your work, such as using salt crystals in various sizes and flicking water or alcohol to create a variety of surface effects. These depend not only on what you use but also on the timing and how wet the surface is when applied. Through this kind of experimentation, you'll begin to build a library of effects, giving you more ways to introduce interest and variation into your paintings. Chapter 4. Controlling colour mixtures. In this chapter, Nita explains how colours are mixed and how the choices you make in that process will affect the final result. Successful colour mixing isn't just about which colours you use, but how you combine them. The idea of working with a limited palette is introduced, including the split primary system, which allows for a much wider range of mixtures from a smaller selection of paint. And as this chapter unfolds, the emphasis shifts towards gaining confidence in mixing your own colours rather than relying on ready-made ones. Nita begins by stressing the importance of not overworking your mixtures. Colours can become dull if they're mixed too thoroughly, and she encourages a lighter touch, allowing the individual colours to remain visible and more vibrant. Different approaches are illustrated, from mixing fully on the palette to allowing the colours to come together more loosely, either on the palette or directly on the paper. And then Nita shifts the focus slightly, moving into mingling colours, encouraging you to let the paint do more of the work. By working on a damp surface, colours are free to flow and merge naturally, creating soft transitions and more spontaneous effects. It's a helpful reminder that not all mixing needs to be controlled, and sometimes stepping back and allowing the colours to interact on their own will lead to much more interesting results. The split primary colour mixing system is a simple but very effective way of achieving cleaner, more reliable mixtures. Instead of working with just 3 primaries, Nita suggests using a warm and a cool version of each, giving you a palette of 6 colours to work from. The colour wheel here helps to make those relationships a bit clearer, showing you how small shifts in colour bias can have quite a noticeable effect on your mixtures. With a little practice, this approach gives you much more control, allowing you to mix a wide range of colours with confidence using a relatively limited palette. Here Nita brings the split primary approach into practice, guiding you through a simple step-by-step demonstration. She begins by planning the composition and considering the values, before transferring the drawing and testing a range of colour combinations. From here, the painting is built up gradually, working from the background forwards, allowing the colours to develop and unify across the surface. Throughout the process, there's a clear emphasis on testing and adjusting, rather than committing too quickly, which helps to maintain control over both colour and tone. And by the final stages, you can see how this approach leads to a cohesive, harmonious result, with the colour mixtures working together naturally across the whole painting. Sometimes you need soft neutral colours to allow brighter ones to stand out, so learning how to mix red greys, violet greys, blue greys and green greys becomes very useful. Nita explains how to achieve these more subdued mixtures and shares with you what she calls the magic colour of burnt sienna. This versatile earth colour gently lowers intensity without dramatically shifting the original hue, softening brighter colours into more natural earthy tones. It's a simple but very effective way to subdue a colour, and burnt sienna is well worth adding to your split primary palette. There are 2 exercises across this spread for you to experiment further. The first uses burnt sienna to mix neutrals, and the second focuses on creating chromatic neutrals using complementary colours. Well, I've learnt something today. I didn't know about burnt sienna, and it's certainly something I shall bear in mind in future. Strong rich darks may seem difficult to make, but they're not all that different from mixing neutrals. They are more effective when they're transparent, so Nita advises using complementary transparent colours to create your mixtures. She has provided an illustrated chart of suggestions for you to try out in exercise 35, making colourful dramatic darks. These mixes are better than lamp black and ivory black straight from the tube. Whilst they have their uses, they don't make colourful darks. The mixtures in the swatches shown beside them are much more vibrant and interesting. The most powerful colours to use for darks are permanent alizarin crimson and phthalo green, with a dab of phthalo blue thrown in to change the colour bias. Nita asks, when there are so many ways of mixing beautiful colours, why is it that some artists depend on ready-made colours? Take green for example. Few manufactured greens are natural looking, and if you have a tube green you like, the chances are you'll use it too much. Did you know the human eye sees more shades of green than any other colour, and that we all see colour slightly differently to one another? There are many beautiful greens already mixed and packaged in tubes, like those shown here on the left. The problem is it's tempting to use them too much, and then everyone's work tends to look the same. But you can easily adjust these paint colours in any medium by adding small amounts of just one other colour to them. On this spread there are 2 exercises for you to follow. The first will show you how to modify tube greens, and the second will teach you how to make lovely greens from yellows and blues. Chapter 5. Working with harmonious colours. Problems with colour in artwork usually stem from including too many colours or combining pigments that don't work well together. In this chapter, Nita explores 8 unique palettes that start with different primaries, making highly distinctive colour wheels of compatible, harmonious colours. We begin by exploring 8 harmonious palettes. For every colour wheel presented on the following pages, the name of each hue and primary colours suits the characteristics of the paints used. Nita shows you how to make your own colour wheel template, and on the right hand page she shares images of the core palettes of several different well-known artists working in various mediums. Can you guess which palette is Nita's? The delicate high key palette comprises of tinting colours, Rose Madder Genuine or Permanent Rose, Aureolin and Cobalt Blue, which make an exquisite high key colour wheel, limited in contrast and beautifully transparent. In watercolour the colours are non-staining, easily lifted and extremely useful and versatile. Nita states that aureolin and rose madder have received negative comments in recent years, but she hasn't experienced any problem with them herself. Although they are pure, bright colours, they all have relatively weak tinting strength. Flowers are ideal subjects for the high key palette, or how about a misty river scene? The traditional palette is a combination of high intensity, transparent and opaque colours, with moderately to strong tinting strength. Cadmium red, new gamboge or cadmium yellow and French ultramarine are workhorse colours and found on almost every artist's palette. New gamboge lends some transparency to the mixtures. Ultramarine is semi-transparent, but the cadmium colours are very opaque. This is an ideal palette for natural subjects, the olive greens of trees and grasses, the subtle violets of shadows, beautiful browns and earthy yellows. The bold palette uses transparent, high-intensity colours with great tinting strength, such as Pyrrole Red or Permanent Alizarin Crimson, Windsor Lemon and Phthalo Blue Red shade. This makes for a versatile palette that ranges from dramatic bold statements featuring rich intense darks to sensitive elegant images using delicate tints. The value range runs from the lightest light to the darkest dark. These dynamic colours generate energy and will work well in any subject, including cityscapes, landscapes, portraits and florals. The transparency of these colours makes them useful as glazes, as long as they are very well diluted, but their staining property merits a word of caution. They can't be lifted easily once they're dry. If you love bold, vibrant colour, you may wish to try the modern high-intensity palette comprising of Hansa Yellow, Quinacridone Magenta and Phthalo Blue Green shade. On the right-hand page, we have a pastel painting by Karen Margulis called Doing the Dance. This vibrant painting illustrates this triad of colours beautifully. The opaque palette is subtle and made up of a triad of yellow ochre, Indian red and cerulean blue. Care must be taken though when working with this palette so as not to disturb the granulating effects of the colours. If you try to move the paint around too much, you'll end up with mud, but it's an excellent palette for landscapes, rocks and buildings. The Old Masters palette. The early masters were limited in their colour choices and used colours very much like the ones here: burnt sienna, yellow ochre or raw sienna and Payne's grey. This lovely palette yields low intensity and semi-transparent mixtures, and many artists fall in love with the Old Masters palette when they try it. It's very interesting in portraits and autumn florals and landscapes. Greens and oranges are low-key and mysterious, with burnt sienna and Payne's grey substituting for red and blue. Violet mixtures don't exist. Instead, a good dark takes its place. This is the only time that Nita recommends using Payne's grey in your palette as a colour in its own right and not as a fix to add darks to a painting. The Bright Earth palette is Nita's personal favourite among the low-intensity Harmonious triads. It has powerful tinting strength and is beautifully transparent. Using brown madder, raw sienna or quinacridone gold and indigo, you're once again forfeiting violet. But if you need to, you can tweak the colour in your own painting by including a brighter red or blue that will yield a violet mixture. The painting on the right-hand page is one of Nita's own, using this palette. She's called it Pirouette. The modern low-intensity palette is powerful and comprises of a complete value range. Perylene Maroon, Quinacridone Gold and Indanthrone Blue provide a solid primary foundation for colour mixing. You can also add in the new mineral colours that are offered by several manufacturers. These are low-intensity colours, many of which granulate into amazing textural effects. This palette works with all subjects, but is especially effective with nature subjects. Nita has shared 8 of her favourite palettes, but says that you don't have to limit yourself strictly to her colours. Permanent Alizarin Crimson may work well with both the intense and the traditional colours, but it's much too powerful for the delicate ones, whilst Burnt Sienna fits in with every palette. Nita suggests you explore variations of the Old Masters palette using ivory black or neutral tint instead of Payne's grey. Exercise number 40 in this book will help you to make your own Harmonious colour chart and colour wheels based on Nita's suggestions. In her demonstration, Compare Harmonious Palettes, you'll see how compatible palettes compare with each other by making 8 sketches of a single subject using each of the palettes illustrated in this chapter. The goal here is to create a distinctive mood, pushing the colours with each palette to show their special characteristics. Notice how Nita has added 3 swatches of each of the 3 colours she's used in each separate palette, and she suggests you do the same. It helps you to remember what colours were that you used. It's now time to narrow your colour selection to a workable number of 8 to 10 colours that reflect your individuality, your own personal basic palette. Nita suggests you have at least 2 sets of primary colours, similar to the split primary palette, or from any combination of 2 harmonious triads. Remember, this is a limited palette. Eventually you'll expand it, but be sure to include burnt sienna and a couple of your personal favourites. On the right hand page there are 4 more palette ideas for painting the different seasons. The idea behind this comprehensive chapter is really to help you discover your own favourite palettes by experimenting with the pigments you already have and the ones you enjoy using most. I'd be really interested to know if you've ever explored colour in this way before. It was something that I was introduced to many years ago, and I actually spent 6 months being mentored in oils by the incredible John Potoshnik, working with a limited palette. His teaching completely changed the way that I think about colour. If you'd like to explore that a little further, many years ago I wrote a blog post about it over on my personal artist website. In case you're curious, I've included a link in the description below to my original blog post. Chapter 6. Expanding your palette with colour schemes. Nita asks, what will you gain by increasing the number of colours on your palette? Your goal is to learn as much as possible about pigments to achieve greater personal expression through colour. So far, you will have mixed all the colours on the colour wheels from a limited palette of 3 primary pigments. So now Nita will teach you about 2 more systems, which she claims will propel you somewhere over the rainbow where all good colourists belong. This sounds exciting, doesn't it? Here Nita explains how to actually build an expanded palette in a practical way. The emphasis here isn't just on adding more colours, but on understanding how they behave, particularly their transparency, tinting strength and how they interact with one another. She encourages you to organise your paints carefully, test them and choose colours that genuinely suit your way of working. We're also introduced to 2 approaches, a traditional palette and a more modern one, both offering you different ways of structuring a full range of colour. Expanded palettes don't have to mean stronger or brighter colour. They can just as easily be soft, muted or earth-based, depending on what it is you want to achieve. You can even make unusual palettes, including iridescent, sparkly or metallic paints. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Nita introduces us to colour schemes, which is a way of organising colour so that it works together, and she encourages you to trust your instincts, test combinations, but above all be willing to experiment. We begin with examples of 2 of the simplest and most useful colour schemes. A monochromatic scheme uses just one colour, relying entirely on light and dark values to create interest. It's very effective for creating mood and atmosphere, and the least complicated of the colour schemes, as there is no discord. An analogous scheme is always harmonious, because the colours are adjacent to each other on the colour wheel. These combinations allow for soft transitions and a sense of light across a painting. And there are 2 exercises to help you explore both of these colour schemes for yourself. Complementary or near complementary schemes use colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. For example, red-green, blue-orange or yellow-violet. This will give you maximum contrast and vibrancy, which is excellent for strong focal points or light versus shadow contrasts. A split complementary uses one main colour plus the 2 colours either side of its complement. So an example is, instead of blue-orange, you would use blue plus red-orange and yellow-orange. This will give you a more harmonious and balanced colour scheme as opposed to the strict complementary one. An analogous complementary scheme combines a group of analogous colours, which are neighbours on the colour wheel, plus one complement. This adds contrast to a harmonious palette, giving you controlled contrast without harshness. The basic triadic scheme uses 3 evenly spaced colours on the colour wheel. These could be, for example, primary colours of red, yellow, blue, or secondary colours green, orange and violet. This scheme will give you balanced but vibrant and highly contrasted colours, and is excellent for bold compositions and expressive work. As we move further through this chapter, the colour relationships become more complex but also more expressive. But as Nita reminds us, colour schemes are not rules to follow, but starting points to help us find which colours might work together in a painting. So right now, you might be thinking, this is all very fascinating, but how do I actually make use of all this information? In this demonstration, Nita offers you a slightly different way of working, one which you may not have thought of before, which is to start with colour, not the subject. Nita confessed that she often struggled to know what to paint, but by choosing a colour palette first and allowing those colours to guide her thinking, the subject emerged as a response to the colour relationships. It's a more playful approach, but one that often leads to surprising results. Have you ever tried this approach before? I'd be interested to know, so if you have, please leave me a comment below. I do read and reply to all of them. And in this demonstration, Nita illustrates step by step how to choose a colour scheme when you start with a subject. So rather than trying to choose the perfect palette straight away, she suggests testing different colour schemes, making small studies and observing how each combination affects the mood of the subject. By making notes and evaluating your studies, you can make the right choices for you before you put paint to paper, thereby increasing your chances of producing successful work. Chapter 7. Using colour contrast. Colour contrast is fundamental to how a painting works, but it's not just about colour choice, but how colours relate and how they oppose or support each other. Hue contrast is when different colours are placed side by side. It works best when colours are pure, bright and unmixed. It creates strong visual impact, making colours appear more vibrant and draws the eye quickly and directly. Contrast isn't just about the colour itself, it's about what sits next to it. You can really see this in the examples shown here, can't you? I'll give you a moment to have a look. Value contrast is light versus dark. It's one of the most important tools in painting, often more important than colour itself. It creates depth and focus, and you can change the entire impact of a painting just by adjusting values without changing the colours. Look at the painting on the left-hand page and notice where your eye is immediately drawn. Another word for value contrast is notan. The incredible Diane Mize has written an excellent book called The Art of Notan, which is all about how to paint light and shadow. It's the only book in my collection that really showed me how to use value contrast in my work, rather than just covering the theory. I've linked to my review of Diane's book in the description below for you. A colour key is where it becomes expressive. A high key painting has mostly light values and feels bright, airy and optimistic. A low key work contains mostly dark values and feels moody, dramatic and subdued. The colours are deeper and more restrained. I love the little painting called Life is Just a Bowl of Cherries by Sylvia Dugan. It's quite joyful, isn't it? Intensity contrast is about saturation, how loud or quiet a colour feels, how bright or dull. You can make colours appear almost iridescent by mingling delicate pastel tints and surrounding them with neutrals, as in the illustration bottom right. Temperature contrast is basically warm versus cool colours. Warm colours such as reds, oranges and yellows feel closer to us, whilst cool colours like blues, greens and violets feel distant. I'm sure you're already familiar with this effect. The Impressionists relied more on temperature contrast than on value contrast to suggest light, and Paul Cézanne used temperature as a tool to manipulate form and space. Using temperature contrast is the traditional approach, a warm foreground versus a cool background, but reversing the colour temperature is where it can become expressive and slightly unexpected. If you deliberately reverse this, you'll have a cool foreground versus a warm background, which will create visual tension and a vibrant push-pull effect. Nita has designed 2 exercises across this spread to help you experiment with this. Complementary contrast uses complementary colours, opposites on the colour wheel. When placed side by side, they intensify each other, but when mixed, they neutralise each other. It's one of the most powerful and widely used colour relationships. I'd be interested to know what you think of the painting on the left-hand page, called Green Reflections by Denise Athanas. So let me know in the comments below. Quantity contrast is not about which colours you use, but about how much of each colour you use. Where does your eye go when you look at the painting on the left-hand page, called After Midnight by Larry Mauldin? This is a tiny but very powerful touch. And what caught your eye in the painting on the right-hand page? If I were to guess, I would say it's the child in the red bikini. You can use this technique to great effect, directing the viewer's eye to where you want them to look. Perpetual contrast is based on how the eye sees and adapts. Colour is influenced by context and visual perception. Optical mixtures result when colours are not physically combined but juxtaposed as small bits of colour, placed so the eye is unable to differentiate individual colours from a distance. They are perceived by your eye as a mixture. Pointillism and the work of the Impressionists Georges Seurat and Camille Pissarro are a classic example, but you can also see this effect if you've stood right next to a billboard. In Nita's demonstration, called Take Risks with Contrast, she's pulled out all the stops and used vibrant colours with strong contrast. To make this work, she simplified the shapes and avoided using too much detail. She decided what colour scheme was most effective and what contrast she needed. Chapter 8. Expressing the harmony of light and shadow with colour. The colours we see are affected by the type of light in the scene. When Monet painted haystacks at different times of day, he was observing this and recording what his eye actually saw in the changing light. In this chapter, you'll learn how to convey different lighting conditions and how to suggest luminosity and use glazing techniques to represent light and shadow in both landscapes and portraits. Here Nita has given you 2 further exercises to try. The first is to create a painting where it becomes unified when all colour is influenced by just one dominant light source. The second is creating the illusion that light is glowing within the painting. The great Joseph Turner was a master of luminosity. All colour is reflected light. All colours in nature are influenced by surrounding colours that reflect back on them. Use this fact in your paintings by showing how light bounces off a surface and is reflected off another surface nearby. This repetition of reflected colour moves the viewer's eye around your picture and helps to unify it. I love the painting called Angels Keep Watch by Jane Freeman. The painting of the cabinet, it looks like a kitchen cabinet. Jane has really managed to capture the effect of strong sunlight. A glaze is a transparent layer of colour over another colour that permits the first one to show through. Glazes alter colours but don't cover them up. Correctly applied, glazes have a delicate luminosity seldom equalled by mixing colours and applying them as a single layer. Transparent glazes are used in oils, watercolours and also in pastels and coloured pencils. Acrylic paints are the ultimate glazing medium because they dry quickly and once dry they cannot be lifted by successive glazes. You can glaze an entire painting or any part of it, which can be a useful correction technique. I mentioned previously how I've experimented with glazing, and I've linked to that video in the description below. I also added a link to a glazing demonstration by the incredible American watercolourist Tim Satinow. He uses a method of painting that is quite unusual in the watercolour world. He paints an entire work using a grisaille, which is a monochrome painting, such as a grayscale, in order to capture the light and shadow, and then he glazes over the top of this in transparent watercolour, building up many layers. It's a fascinating technique and one that I'm itching to try for myself. Nita explains how the surface colour you paint on influences every colour you place on top of it. It establishes overall colour harmony and affects contrast right from the start. A white support will give you higher contrast and brighter highlights, especially with watercolour, whereas a tone support provides a softer, more integrated look. And when it comes to painting shadows, Nita tells you to think of shadows as a transparent veil through which you can see the colour of the surface they lay on. Slightly darker in value, but not black and never opaque. Shadows need not be neutral, but if you do prefer neutral shadows, use chromatic neutrals, mingling the colours together rather than mixing them thoroughly. When painting a portrait, Nita recommends that you start by painting the shadows first, as this establishes the facial structure. Faces are constructed through shadow shapes, not outlines. This process will enable you to establish a likeness more quickly. In Nita's step-by-step demonstration, it's interesting to see how she gradually brings her self-portrait to life, starting with the ghostly image in step 1 through to the final painting in step 4. As you saw in the previous demonstration, some artists start by painting shadows first, building forms based on the light and dark pattern of an established direction of light. Then they glaze colour over these shadow patterns. Other artists complete the painting and add the shadows last, so they'll be less likely to confuse the direction of light. Others develop the shadows as they go along, keeping a fixed light source in mind throughout. Nita suggests you experiment with all three methods and pick the one that suits your style of working the best. You'll already be aware that light changes throughout the day, affecting colour, contrast and mood. Morning light is luminous and clear with high key colour. At midday, light becomes harsh and intense, creating strong contrasts. Afternoon and early evening, the light softens into golden tones, creating warmth and long shadows. Early evening light is often referred to as the golden hour. Before we had computers, fashion photographers would often shoot their photos at this time of day. Twilight shifts towards blue-violet, and sunset introduces us to deep reds and crimsons and oranges. The key takeaway here is that each time of day has a distinct colour identity, and you can design your colour schemes around it. The same can be true of geographical locations. The light varies enormously. An Australian once said to me that the light in the UK was dull, even when the sun was shining, and it wasn't until I visited Australia I understood what they meant. Everything there looks positively psychedelic, so bright and vibrant I needed sunglasses all the time. In 2000 I went to Greece for a family holiday, and I thought the colours of the sea had been photoshopped in the brochure, but they hadn't. The sea really does look turquoise because of the light. Here is one of the photographs I took there. I used it in a tutorial when I was teaching digital scrapbooking. Everything in the final work has been produced from pulling colours from the original photograph to create a palette and a colour scheme. The background, cardboard, tape and labels, just like Nita has been sharing with you in her incredible book. Light doesn't just change with the hour or the geographical location, it also changes with the season and even the weather. And here are two more exercises for you to try. The first is to paint the 4 seasons with the light in mind, and the second is to practice painting weather. Chapter 9. Unifying Colour and Design. Colour may catch the eye, but it's the design of a painting that holds everything together, and in this final chapter Nita will show you how to design your painting, and she'll pull everything together that we've looked at in the previous chapters. Line is the backbone of design. It can describe form, suggest movement, create rhythm and direction, lead the eye through a composition, and create focal points. Shapes are the next step beyond a line. They define space and create visual structure. They can be realistic or abstract. Simplifying shapes will strengthen your composition. Value is just as important as colour, if not more so. Therefore, planning values early is essential to ensure a successful painting, and value should always come before any colour decisions. That being said, the size of colour areas will also strongly affect the design. Equal sized areas feel static and weaken visual interest, so remember to vary the sizes to create movement and energy. A painting isn't just something you look at, it's something your eye travels through. You can influence this with the use of pattern and movement. You create pattern through the repetition of shapes, colours or marks. It guides the viewer's eye and creates rhythm and unity. Movement controls how the eye travels through the painting, and this is created through line direction, shape placement and colour shifts. Harmony in a painting is what creates a sense of unity and calm. It's achieved through similar colours such as analogous colours or a limited palette, related values and repeated shapes and elements. But without contrast, a painting feels flat, so the balance between harmony and contrast is key. And here again, Nita has included 2 exercises to help you achieve this. Rhythm is what gives a painting flow and pacing, whilst repetition reinforces structure. Together they guide the viewer's eye and hold a painting together. And in this step-by-step demonstration, Nita shows you how to maintain rhythm with brushwork. Here Nita explains gradation and balance. Gradation is the gradual change in colour, value and temperature. And balance is when design elements are distributed to produce an aesthetically pleasing whole. On the right-hand page, there are 3 examples of balance: symmetrical, off-balance and asymmetrical. And finally, dominance, which creates clarity and focus, and is achieved by making one element stronger and more important through intensity or brightness of colour, size, value or temperature. Concluding this incredible book from Anita, Karen Margulis has kindly provided a step-by-step demonstration which will show you how to build and enrich colour layer by layer. At the back of her book, Nita has included a very handy colour index guide. Brands of paint may differ widely in colour, even when made from the same pigments. So you can use this chart for oils, acrylics and other mediums, but bear in mind colours may differ slightly because of differences in binders and other additives. And here we have a complete index of every single exercise in the book. There are 90 in total, which is quite remarkable. Almost every idea Nita introduces about colour is supported with a practical exercise. And that brings us to the end of this book. What stands out for me looking back through it is Nita doesn't simply talk about colour, she shows you how to understand it, test it and use it in your own practice. From contrast and harmony through to light, shadow and composition, by the end you're not just looking at colour differently, you're thinking about how it works within a painting as a whole. This is not necessarily a book to read from beginning to end, but one to dip into, try and exercise, then return to again and again. For me, it feels like an entire degree course in colour and a book you keep on hand to refer to. And I'd like to acknowledge and show my respects to Nita Leland once again, and to thank her for the legacy she's left behind. Her book will continue to teach us for a very long time. If you've used this book yourself, I'd be very interested to hear how you found it, or which exercises have helped you the most. Please let me know in the comments below. I do reply to every one. If you'd like to take a closer look at the book for yourself, you'll find links in the video description below, including Amazon and the independent bookshop.org. If you've enjoyed my review and found it helpful, a like or a hype really does help the video to reach others who are interested in learning more about colour, and it also helps to support me too. And if you enjoy my quiet exploration of art books, you'll find many more videos here on the channel. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.